Hello, I'm Zeb Links, editor at Aspects of History. There's nothing like a summer blockbuster to get cinema back to the top of the agenda. One of the main talking points of the year so far, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, has split opinion, but no doubt it's achieved conversation. In this episode, the first of the newly rebooted Aspects of History Film Club, I'm joined first by classicist and YouTuber Erica Stevenson, aka MoAn, to discuss her new book, The Odyssey Effect, and explore the extraordinary afterlife of Homer's poem, from the epic tradition's oral beginnings to this year's long-awaited adaptation, before I welcome film editor Henry Thackray for an in-depth chat about the film itself. Together, my guests examine why Homer's epic continues to inspire successive generations, debate Nolan's interpretation of the character of Odysseus, the challenge of translating the poem to the screen, the director's commitment to practical effects and spectacle, and whether the film succeeds both as a blockbuster and as an adaptation of one of history and literature's greatest stories. Next week on the pod, Gautam Hazarika discusses with Phil Craig his history of Indian soldiers captured by the Japanese in 1942, which centers on Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army and the choices men had to make to survive. Strap in then, no wax in the ears required with the exception of a few spoilers for our discussion of the Odyssey. Erica, a treat to have you on and join us on the Aspects of History podcast, the first of our newly rebooted Film Club episodes and the week that the Odyssey hits the screen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Is. So you are the brains behind MoAn, which is a pretty massive YouTube channel, if any of our listeners are inclined to YouTube. But your book, The Odyssey Effect, came out last month. For one thing, it's a very prepossessing object to look at and hold, but also full of extremely fascinating anecdotes and insight into just how Homer's poem has been received over nearly 3 millennia. So what inspired you to trace the afterlife of this epic rather than the usual focus kind of solely on its origins?
Well, it was a job that was given to me by the publishers. So they came to me and they had a really clear vision of what the book was going to be. And they knew like even the little things that they wanted in it. So they knew the films they wanted me to discuss, the books they wanted me to discuss, the time period. And really it was my job as the historian to either agree with some of those or to, throw in my own to say, I think maybe this would suit your project a bit better and go through it that way. So I'm really grateful that they gave me that project because I wouldn't have thought of the book myself. It's such a creative idea. I think that it was a privilege to be given the opportunity.
So, I mean, not coincidentally, I imagine the Nolan adaptation of The Odyssey is already generating enormous anticipation and footfall to match. The poem is evidently about to reach a new audience, a pretty vast one. Why is it nearly 3,000 years on that it's a work that not only filmmakers but other artists still feel convicted enough to revisit?
Oh my gosh, for a plethora of different reasons. I think we would all love to have one reason for this. We'd love to say, it's a really good story, which objectively it is. It's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic poem. The way of engaging with it, you can listen to it, you can read it. It's very diverse in that sense. But ultimately, it's, something different to everybody and people will get different things out of it because at its core, it's a very human story. So that's something that Homer is so unbelievably brilliant with doing, is telling us this tale where everybody can relate to it to some degree. Okay, maybe you don't relate to Odysseus, but maybe you might relate to a side character or a side quest or one of the themes that's going on. And that really is what I think pulls people back to it, that there is a way for all of us to see ourselves within it, even though they're people from a completely different time period. They are still people on a voyage and on a homecoming that still means something to everyone.
Give us a bit of insight into your first experience reading the Odyssey, because that kind of takes up the first few pages and it's a great story in itself.
Yeah, my experience reading the Odyssey was really special and definitely very unique. So I was quite unwell when I was a teenager, to put it very lightly, and I ended up finding myself in a psychiatric hospital. And when I was there, obviously I was 16 years old, so I was really young. And I was at school at the time and my teachers did not want to give me any work to do. But something I always tell people is life in a psychiatric hospital is very regimented. And so we had these hours that were just for schoolwork where I would literally just sit and play Scrabble with nurses or whatever other board games that they had. And I was like banging my head against this wall being like, I need something. And I begged my mum to go and to ask the school to give me something to do. And thankfully, my classics teacher just gave her the Odyssey and said, she can just read it if she wants to. We're not giving her homework, but if she wants to read it, she can. And really, that was the perfect time of my life to discover Homer and to read it. I didn't realize it at the time. You're just kind of given a book, and I was just like, oh my God, thank God it's a book. It's something that's not this stupid game of Scrabble, which, by the way, I kept losing. The nurses were not nice to me when it came to Scrabble. I was really, really bad at it. So I would play it all day, and they would just thrash me. So it was wonderful to have this book. And it was the perfect escape because the Odyssey is so crazy. And I guess my life at the time was also really crazy. But I suddenly wasn't the 16-year-old that was like, getting a blood test every single day or getting woken up at 3 a.m. to have my blood sugar level taken. Like, that wasn't my reality. I was suddenly reading this story and I was on the boat with Odysseus and I was taken on this crazy, journey, this homecoming that he had to go through that was completely separate from what I was going through. So I'm always aware when I talk about the Odyssey, I have to really separate that experience that I had with it and just look at it as a poem, because obviously all of my own emotions get tied up in it. I get really protective of it. And that's just not, the experience that literally anyone else has had when reading this poem.
Yeah, no, you're so right. It means utterly different things, utterly different people. Nolan has kind of built a career on stories that blend complexities of time, big spectacle, a lot of psychological entanglement, and we kind of remember the Odyssey, the poem, for its monsters and adventures. But at its core, it is, as you say, a story about kind of trauma and homecoming and shifting identities. Do you think modern audiences might occasionally overlook that essence to it?
I don't know if it's necessarily overlooked. I think it's just like a text that I think a lot of people think is really serious. And so they're not really going into it with just the idea that it's a really good story, because I think a lot of times we look at the Odyssey and the Iliad and they're like on this massive pedestal. And I think that's the big problem that people have to overcome, that actually when you sit down with the text, it's really fun and it will make you laugh and it will make you cry. And it has really deep parts of the story, really dark parts of the story, but some of it is also really light and really playful. And again, that's a great thing about it. And so I think Nolan was a great person to tackle those things because, like you said, he loves a good time jump and, big spectacle and all of that. And I think it's more so a case of the audience's idea just because it's Homer. It's like the Homer, as opposed to actually what goes on in the poem. Like as soon as people open it, they're like, oh, this is great. This is actually just like a really fun story. It's just getting people to engage with it more so.
And kind of one of the arguments you focus on most in the Odyssey effect is that every generation is inclined to reinvent Homer's verse to reflect its own concerns. How do you think the film stands up, kind of especially regarding Matt Damon's Odysseus and kind of considering what we think of as heroic qualities in the 21st century? Do we think the characters as portrayed as sufficiently complicated or as kind of morally ambiguous as he ought to be, given the poem?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think everybody will have a different response to this. I actually went to go and watch the film. So I've been twice already. The first time I went to the pre-screening, and last night I went by myself to like an indie cinema because I wanted to see how people reacted to it. And what was funny is that actually in the pre-screening, everybody was like, this was amazing, blah, blah. And then in the indie one, people didn't really connect the dots to the ancient text, if that makes sense. So I was like listening to everybody sort of in the lobby afterwards because it was like a really local cinema. So everybody like knows each other. It was so cute. Everybody knows each other and all of this. And people were saying that, they didn't really get X, Y, and Z from the poem. And watching it, obviously, as you say in my book, I go through all of these different iterations. And so I'm much more flexible with sort of looking at it and going, okay, maybe this is different for Nolan and that's completely fine. It's his art. He's allowed to do whatever it is that he wants with it. But it was mostly listening to other people saying, oh, that's not what I expected. That's not what I wanted. That kind of has shaped how I view it. Because something that I look at in the book is more so people's reactions to these works of art. And so looking at Nolan's reaction, it's not necessarily about what I think is a classicist. I'm so close to the text, I can't do that. But seeing how other people interact with it, I think that people are generally kind of saying the same thing, which is he's not as complicated. and he's not as morally ambiguous. We are much more dealing with somebody who is feeling a lot of guilt for the war that we don't see the Odysseus of the ancient text dealing with. And from what I've overheard, again, just, regular people watching this, that was a disappointment. So I think that was interesting for me to learn through this experience. It's like, okay, well, people more so on the grand scale are expecting a very specific Odysseus and they're not getting that.
Really interesting. I mean, as you say, you've traced so many adaptations, kind of ranging from Dante, James Joyce, The Simpsons, and Hollywood. Where do you see Nolan's film kind of fitting into that long tradition of reinterpretation? Can you pinpoint what it is that makes a great adaptation from one that kind of merely rehashes the plot?
Yeah, it's always the iconic scenes. So the really popular retellings, it's always the iconic scenes are basically untouched, which I found really interesting because I was expecting to see a lot more difference here. I was expecting to kind of be like, maybe it's the color grading or maybe it's, modern politics infusing it. And like, no, it is these iconic scenes that people go to watch. So, Nolan changes a bunch of things. The scene that I was really shocked that he changed, which is arguably the most iconic scene, is the Cyclops scene. And to remove this like nobody trick, which I don't know if your audience are familiar with the nobody trick, but it's this wordplay that Odysseus puts forward where he tells the Cyclops that his name is Nobody. And so when he blinds the Cyclops kind of screams out to the other Cyclopes and is like, nobody's hurt me. And it's this amazing moment that everybody, when they read the text, is like, damn, he's so smart and he's so wily. I would have never thought of that. I wish I had thought of that. And so when Nolan changes those iconic things, where does it stand up with the others? The problem is that it's the first ever film made on IMAX. So it's objectively going to be somewhere near the top because that is an incredible feat alone. But with all of these changes in comparison to the other Odyssey films as Odyssey films or Odyssey iterations or Odyssey television shows, I think it'll be somewhere in the middle for sure.
There we go. Yeah. So like many recent retellings, indeed, and it's a kind of trend in wider literature, have shifted the focus towards female figures such as Penelope, Circe, Calypso, those voices that might have been kind of marginalized in the Odyssey. But do you think, I mean, for modern adaptations of the classics generally, including this one, do they have a responsibility to engage with those alternative viewpoints, or is there still value in returning to Homer on its own terms?
I think there's value in any kind of revisiting. I don't necessarily think that you have to feel, any artist of any kind has to feel a responsibility to do it in a certain way. That's the point of art. And a really cool new thing that people have been doing is looking at the women because they are so wonderful and fantastic. And they always have been. These aren't invented retellings and invented characters. They're there in Homeric poetry. And I think it's more so a case of every artist just needs to see the text through their own eyes and be okay with seeing the text through their own eyes. If they want to focus on Telemachus and make him the main character because they really deeply relate to him, that's just as valuable, in my opinion, because it speaks to so many people that read the text and that felt very connected to Odysseus' son as a man who's going into, a boy who's reached manhood that has had no father to teach him what to do. He's supposed to step into a really performative role, potentially as king, and he does not know how to handle that. And I know a lot of people read that character and love that character. And so I don't think that there's a responsibility necessarily for anyone in particular, but I think probably where I sit mostly is whoever you choose to go with, there is value in that, but there is a responsibility to then hold that character to the standard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, do it properly, do it justice.
Yeah.
So for those who might pick up the Odyssey effect because they've watched the film, what exactly do you hope that they'll discover about the original poem that even the most ambitious cinematic rendition might not be able to capture or seize upon?
I think probably mostly the thing that I hope people get from my book is understanding that there's actually no one way of retelling this. Even when we're looking at the ancient text, this is something that I kind of discuss in the book very lightly, is that this is seemingly just the most popular version of this poem, but it was oral poetry. So we have no idea what the other versions or the other iterations of this story was. And obviously as classicists, we need to work with what's written down and the actual story that comes to us. But I hope that through by going through even all of these different versions in my book, it's like we have a bit more of a flexible attitude towards these stories that did start orally and that were passed down that way, because even between 5th century BC Athens and the 8th century, the story changes hugely. There are different moments that are highlighted, different favorite characters, like all of that happens. And so I think anytime we see a retelling of this, it will not be perfect. It's just not possible. And that's really, as opposed to any of the themes that are in the text, I think that's what I hope people take away the most, is that like it's sort of a lost, I don't know, not necessarily a lost cause, but I think it's just a bit ambitious to go into it and to expect you're going to get everything the way that you want it and the way that Homer tells it, because even in ancient times, people weren't getting that version.
So should we be excited for his retelling of the Iliad?
I think the Iliad is like the hardest thing ever to retell. If anybody chooses to do it, you're never going to do that right, ever. And I'm going to be in the front row actually critiquing that. Like that's one. I'm very flexible with the Odyssey. I'm very flexible. With the Iliad, I am very rigid in how people attack the Iliad. So yeah, if he chooses to do that, I will be front and center with my popcorn and my notebook and expecting things to be ticked off.
Yeah, I can imagine the catalogue of the ships might get a bit tedious.
Yeah, you just got to hope that someone just doesn't do that.
Yeah, something to skip. Erica, many thanks for coming on and joining me. So the Odyssey Effect is published in hardback by Epic Inc. and we'll put the links in the description, so do check it out. Huge congratulations. It's a really arresting read. Look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Here at Aspects of History, we aim to bring you the very best in history writing, from leading historians, best-selling authors, and fresh voices, exploring all corners of the past from every angle, through articles, interviews, reviews, and podcasts like this one. We are marking an exciting new chapter for our Substack offering, starting this month. Subscribe for free to receive a curated editorial newsletter sent every Wednesday, featuring the latest articles free to read on our site, podcast highlights and recommendations from the archive. Or, even better, become a yearly subscriber on Substack to receive both annual magazine subscription and an exclusive magazine feature each Saturday, with original interviews, essays, and author contributions delivered straight to your inbox that you won't find on our site. Over the next couple of months, you will receive features and interviews from best-selling historians, names such as Simon Sebag Montefiore, Anthony Selden, Jonathan Fennell, and Paul Mason discussing their recent releases. Visit aspectsofhistory.com or search for Aspects of History on Substack to subscribe today. Henry Thackray, how long have we known each other?
Oh, hi, Zeb. We've known each other since, oh God, we were about 13, I think, right?
2009, I reckon
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. Just a few years ago.
Indeed. That's actually not very nice to think about. But you've reached you're currently scaling the greasy pole. It's very useful that I have a friend who is junior editor at The Quarry, which is a post-production editing house, right?
Yeah, that's right. It is in the film industry, but obviously, well, not obviously, but we do very, very short edits rather than the 3-hour long Odyssey. So a little different for sure, but it helps to know a little bit about movies, I think.
Indeed, and that was always what we remember of you all the way through school. You were kind of just full of all the facts, which was great, and that's continued. So we watched it together about a week ago now. I was there as you walked out of the cinema, and you looked pretty happy. But yeah, what was the kind of, this has become 2026's biggest talking point. But yeah, what was your immediate reaction walking out in Swiss Cottage? Did you feel you just watched a Christopher Nolan or something kind of different from that?
No, I definitely felt like I'd watched a Christopher Nolan movie, but it felt like kind of, the most Christopher Nolan movie, I think. It felt like him on, 150%, I think when I came out of it, I was pretty positive, but maybe a little overwhelmed by like the extremely loud and extremely loud sound and quick editing. But I think the more I've kind of sat on it and thought about it over the last week, the more I kind of I think I appreciate it, and I kind of wish I'd watched it again, probably on a regular size screen before we'd done this, just to kind of sit in it a second time, so that you're not surprised by anything. You can sort of enjoy things a little more, But no, I thought it was excellent. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that sound was crazy. I mean, so yeah, we were watching it, packed cinema.
Opening night.
Be what Christopher Nolan does kind of for the rest of his career, is just pack out big summer blockbusters.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he's almost I think he almost has this kind of mythological idea of himself now, where he feels like he's the only director left who can still do this and can make these kind of epics that are practical, at least mainly. And he kind of feels he has to do it, because if he doesn't, no one else will. So yeah, I feel like he's going to keep trying. He's going to keep trying to do this. Although I don't quite know what he does after this, because the scale of this movie is immense. So yeah, I'm not sure.
I mean, you kind of just answered the next question, but he's adapted books before, but never kind of something as untouchable as Homer. Did you get the impression? Well, I presume you got the impression he approached it with confidence rather than caution.
I think, yeah, I definitely don't think he was cautious about it. I think I sort of came out of it thinking, oh, that was a great Christopher Nolan movie that, used the Odyssey to tell the story that Christopher Nolan wanted to tell, rather than, say, the Odyssey directed by Christopher Nolan, if you see what I mean. Like, it felt like, Christopher Nolan wanted to talk about certain things, as he has now for a few films. Like, it felt very similar thematically to Oppenheimer. And so I think, yeah, I came out of it thinking, oh, that is a Christopher Nolan movie, rather than necessarily a movie that is the Odyssey. So I think he sort of, yeah, he used it for his own. I think for him it was more important to use the Odyssey as a way of showcasing the themes he wants to talk about, rather than the other way around.
So, I mean, on that, Matt Damon's Odysseus has split the room. They've kind of, it's been Marmite. Viewers have welcomed this kind of quite vulnerable, guilt-ridden hero who is clearly, strung up about what happened at Troy, but then others are kind of saying he was less elusive and tricky than the character might otherwise be in the poem. Where would you place yourself on that?
I think that, I'm someone who definitely, you have a much greater understanding and knowledge of the Odyssey, of the text, than I do, for sure. I have a very, very limited understanding. So for me, the Matt Damon's performance kind of worked, because I think the film is sort of about guilt and, kind of should we humans feel guilty for like the wars that we put upon each other. So I think for that it worked. But I feel like maybe if you're more of a purist, then I could see you being left a little bit disappointed. How did you? You're someone who's read it. Like, what did you think about it?
Yeah, I kind of, whenever people have been asking me, I've kind of given almost two kind of ratings. I've kind of said 7 out of 10, good fist. I think decent showing as a movie. And then, like, actually, the more I think about it from the kind of classical point of view, the more I'm kind of slightly like, oh, why didn't he do that? Why did he? And but then I do feel like it's quite. It's impossible to film, right? You can't. It's an epic poem. It's what is it? 14,000 lines long of Greek verse. So obviously there needed to be that, but there were just. I didn't like Odysseus, Damon's Odysseus, but I also didn't dislike him. Whereas I think people definitely, with the character in the poem, I think people probably are more polarized one way or the other. then
Mhm.
maybe. He didn't. He wasn't offensive, but he didn't get me going.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think
yeah,
it felt a bit like Nolan wanted a steady ship, and Matt Damon is kind of a great grounding. You know, he grounds he's like as a central character. He's pretty, he's pretty solid. Like, you're getting someone who's like probably good at their job with Matt Damon. You watching a movie with Matt Damon, you're like, he probably knows what he's doing.
yeah,
So you can kind of go along with it. But like, I know, like, yeah, the Cyclops scene. I know people were a bit annoyed about that because that's like such a
yeah.
key bit of the story. They kind of just abandoned.
I think what was quite strange, and now we're kind of veering into spoiler territory, but I'm sure most of the country has seen it already. But with the Cyclops, I mean, they did kind of refer to him talking, and I actually
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, you couldn't really hear much of it. It was about the only thing in the film you couldn't hear, was the Cyclops kind of clearly speaking. But yeah, it was. It's a shame. I think that would have been I mean, it's the most famous story. Uh, Erica Stevenson, who we just listened to, I mean, she points to the success of these uh, Odyssey kind of retellings purely on iconic scenes, and I mean that is the iconic scene, and I thought the Cyclops was great visually. I don't know, a really kind of fleshy. I loved how the eye wasn't a kind of blinking thing; it was kind of turned on its axis. I thought that it was a really nice, and then reading about this puppet afterwards. But I do think it's slightly half baked, the kind of the whole aha, gotcha
Hmm.
moment.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I
yeah.
agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
What about? I mean, yeah, we've talked about kind of character there, but spectacle. Talk us through some of the kind of chat about the IMAX from a techie point of view. These kind of IMAX spectacle, the vast seascapes. These monsters that were probably, I mean, I just mentioned the Cyclops puppet. He has a preference for practical effects instead of CGI. Even if the classicists are taking issue, is this a kind of triumph of film craft?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it was all pretty impressive. Like, obviously, the big creatures are like, the Cyclops was impressive. Embarrassing, I can't remember the name of the tall guys.
Like Dragonians, I
But
think. Yeah.
even that was like really well done. And like,
Mm.
I've now seen some behind the scenes stuff where they kind of did the Lord of the Rings forced perspective. 7 foot tall people, and then
Mm.
Matt Damon was like, his stunt double was 4'5". Um, I kind of love that they kind of did all those kind of, very classic practical stuff. But even, yeah, even the Cyclops who they used like
Yeah.
a practical puppet. Then obviously they kind of, enhanced with visual effects. Even that kind of thing is just very impressive. And I thought it all looked great. But even, I think as well for me, even the smaller, the smaller stuff, the kind of less on the face of it, visual effects, say like Cersei turning all the soldiers into pigs and stuff, I thought was just like really, really excellent uses of like prosthetics and little things like that I think really sold it. Um, I think on the other side, I think maybe uh the stuff that maybe didn't work so well was um not the sirens, but sort of again, I can't remember the name, but
Dilla.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
that felt very um it felt very CGI, and obviously it
Mm.
was very brief, and you sort of don't even see it, which I think is a sort of a good way to do it. Where if you don't let people see what they're looking at, it's a more convincing effect. But even that I felt maybe the most half baked out of everything. But
Yeah.
I think ultimately he really nailed the scale of things and
Mm.
the kind of visual side of everything. Um, yeah, I think he did. I think it was pretty good. Yeah.
With stuff like that, is he getting more kind of Catholic small c as he gets older about this kind of purist mentality? Does that mean it's going to last longer in perpetuum, like in terms of how the film ages when he insists on practical effects?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, of course, I think it will look, you'll be able to look back in 25 years at the Cyclops, and it will still look pretty good. I think the seams won't really show for a long time. Yeah.
And then yeah, I mean, I think that middle hour of Monsters and Strange Lands was the kind of best part. I mean, is he now the kind of most visually supreme director out there?
I'd say so. Yeah, definitely at this point. I mean, no one else is doing movies on that scale that are still using practical stuff. I think it's just much easier now to use, your green screen, and I think sort of things like a Marvel movie, or that kind of big franchise budget stuff. That's that's all being done in studios, and they'll film a lot of different versions of stuff, because they sort of, I think a lot of the time there, they don't necessarily know what the story is. They're sort of making it up as they go along a little bit with like script rewrites. So they give themselves a lot of room to adapt to what the story is when they shoot their effects. So that means that everything feels very disjointed, and it doesn't have the immersion that the practical stuff does. I think it's a question of like, if you do practical things, you're sort of locked in to the decisions you're making on the day. When you're actually on set and you're filming this stuff in camera, you can't change it at that point. You have what you have, and I think like forcing yourself to do it, and it is harder to do. You've got to be more confident, but I think the results speak for themselves. I mean, the only other person I think who's doing it to a level similar would probably be Denis Villeneuve, who does the Dune films, Blade Runner 2049, things like that. He has an incredible sense of scale as well. I think he's probably the only person at the moment who's on the level of Christopher Nolan.
And he's made a career out of fractured chronologies, warping time across his back catalogue, and then obviously the poem plays games with time and storytelling. How did you kind of gauge that particular trope within this film? Was it structurally a success?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Troy sequence is, I thought he used it structurally to kind of to get across his themes. You sort of, the first time you see Troy, sort of them explaining the story, then as you kind of, as more of that day is flashed back to you, the kind of guilt of Matt Damon is
as well.
Yes, it's exactly. It's kind of like revealed, and it does it really well. You feel every time you go back, there's a new context for the same scene. So yeah, I think he does it pretty efficiently. Yeah.
And then kind of anything surprise you about reactions? The audience in there, your kind of what you've read, general chit chat with your colleagues at work. What do you feel the kind of reaction has been? Have they responded to Homer or just to Nolan?
I think some people have been, more interested in mythology now, because I think it is such a canon, or like bedrock of kind of like, storytelling, that I think, obviously people are like, people are, they've been overwhelmed, or, very impressed by the Nolan filmmaking aspect of it, of course. But I think, I think a lot of people who maybe weren't as much into the Odyssey, or didn't know very much about it, are kind of now looking around and being like, oh, okay, I'm seeing all these other stories that are clearly have taken stuff from the Odyssey, but I just didn't know about it, until now I've seen it. I'm like, oh, okay, this is where this is from. This is where like this kind of story originates from. You kind of see the what's the word? The kind of
it's a mushroom effect, isn't it? It's
exactly. The background radiation of it that kind of permeates through all storytelling. And I think like people are interested by that, and are kind of diving back into it. And as someone I know bought the Iliad and the Odyssey the next day. So
Emily Wilson, who is probably her translation is probably the one that's made most waves in in the last 20 years, and she's kind of tatted up with all of this Odyssean imagery. She did a review for the Times, I think, quite scathing.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
not enough sex and food, which does feature quite heavily. But I mean, it was quite interesting to see her go to town on it, when I think he had kind of cited her at one point.
He did, yeah, which is kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a smack in the teeth for him.
Yeah, quite. But yeah, she takes no prisoners in her translation. She takes no prisoners in her review. So Christopher Nolan's had his crack at it. If you could hand the Odyssey to any kind of living director, who would you most like to see tackle it, and why?
So I think maybe the boring answer is Peter Jackson.
Okay.
I think he probably would have done a good job. Probably a little more he would have got more into the fantasy elements of it as well.
Yeah,
I think so. He definitely wouldn't have been as grounded. Denis Villeneuve as well. I'm sure he would probably do something similar to Nolan. He would do a more grounded take. I think someone like Robert Eggers, who did The Witch and The Northman.
Yeah, Lighthouse.
Yeah, exactly. Nosferatu. I think he would probably be a really fun version of it as well. His would be very, he'd really get into the grossness of it.
Yeah.
I think
the
he
viscerality. I mean, I imagine the Cersei scene would be quite something with Robert Eggers.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't something already. I mean, his trailer was on when we were watching it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could see him doing it.
Yeah.
You could see him doing a small scale version of it. Maybe where you don't see Troy. Or anything like that.
Have you ever seen that the film that came out maybe a couple of years ago, the Pasolini? I think it was called The Return. It's Ralph Fiennes.
No, I haven't, but I did watch the I think I've been getting a few of the scenes pop up on my Instagram feed.
No, I mean,
did you watch it?
I did when it came out, and I was kind of slightly left cold, but actually it's kind of stuck with me. I mean, it only focuses on the last, handful of books and him returning.
Yeah, because it's just called The Return, right?
Yeah, so there's no monsters or anything. So it's comparing apples and oranges, but it's a very it has kind of stuck with me, the image. And I mean, the shape Ralph Fiennes is in that film is pretty frightening as well.
I
mean, sculptural. Anyway, so I guess we'll bring it to a close. We've done our 20 minutes. So thanks for joining me. We are going to try and produce a few of these a year is the plan.
Sounds good. Yeah.
I think next on the list is going to be Pressure, which I think is coming out 12th of September.
Yeah, not too long.
Meteorologists.
Brendan Fraser.
Which, I mean, again, I think we saw the trailer for that in the cinema, and looks
we did.
Pretty grand, pretty epic. So only a couple of months to wait till that one, less than. But yeah, thanks for joining me, Henry.
No problem, Zeb.
Lovely to reboot the Aspects of History Film Club with you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please share with friends and family and keep your eyes peeled for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.